I'd like to basically share a story with you, and the story is one that spans between a spectrum between innovation, the spectrum between the issue of demolition and regeneration. And in between that is a structure that has basically catalyzed change and has also stimulated a form of education through innovation. A few years ago, it struck me that not only are most cities located, about 70% of most cities are by water, but that specifically nearly 70% of all African capital cities are also by water. And it's no surprise because, of course, water is perhaps the seat of civilization, the cradle of civilization for mankind. From the Fertile Crescent, man has always settled around water. And ironically, also, the fact that we're still settling around water is the issue of climate change, where nearly, although Africa is said to be the least responsible for climate change, is actually the one most affected by it. We have found evidence of people beginning to adapt to both the challenge of, is this a pointer? I think? No. Challenge of climate change. This is a flooding condition, and at the same time, you see these guys already having a great time. The story sets in a city that is the second largest in Africa, and in a country that is said to be the largest black nation, Nigeria. And that city is growing rapidly and exponentially, with its population projected to be nearly 24 million in the next few years. Right in the center of the city of Lagos is a body of water, the lagoon. And technically, actually, when you look at the geography of the city, the heart of Lagos is actually a body of water. And right in the middle of that heart is a settlement that we have been studying for 3 years called Makoko. Just missed that. 1 second. Hold on, that's back. All right, anyway. Okay, there you go. All right, so Makoko is a community that basically lives on water. It's a kind of a different civilization from what most people are used to. So, I mean, we all kind of live on land, and apparently some people actually live on water. Yeah, I mean, they don't have gills and fins, but they are it's sort of a civilization that actually thrives on water. It's no surprise, as I'll come to tell you, of these kinds of civilizations. This is a home in Makoko. It is not perhaps your destination for tourism, but this gentleman here has a full life and he is able to conduct his lifestyle. This is how people get around and shop in Makoko. And hold on a second. All right, there. And in 2011, the forces of urbanization and the interest in developing the city led to an effort by the government to begin demolishing parts of this community because it sat in the heart of the city in a prime real estate. And a lot of the people there were displaced. Their homes were literally cut down with a chainsaw, and the exercise stopped because one of the community members was actually killed. So this idea of trying to completely develop and the cities forcing the settlements to change became one of the questions that I took on, with an image like this showing in 2000 the cover of Economist magazine saying the hopeless continent Africa, and in about 1 decade, 2011, the same magazine is reporting that Africa is rising. So the question of, the last 10 years, how did this happened so quickly became a point of interest. I wanted to ask, why is this continent developing so quickly? Where is it developing? What are the forms of development? Who are the drivers of development? And I launched the project called the African Water Cities, which basically looked at the intersection of rapid urbanization and climate change. With that was a form of learning and educating, which I taught through Cornell University. We developed 7 ways of understanding the context: demographics, economics, social politics, infrastructure, morphology, environment, and resources. So these are, if you understand these 7 drivers of development within any kind of context or project, you basically understand how things, the context of the project that you're working on. So, I mean, for instance, in demographics, the African continent, slum prevalence, economics, we know what China is, the role of China in Africa, social politics, how the governments and cycles of governments affect development, infrastructure, water is actually an important infrastructure, morphology, the relationship between cities and the coasts, and environment, the fact that the intertropical climate zone, which is perhaps the richest part of the whole, the globe. Africa has the largest portion of the tropical belt, and thereafter resources. Resources, oil, of course, how that is translated, the transactions within countries. And that led us to the publication of a book that we called Water and the City. And this is really the seat of innovation, where 3 years ago, I went to this school and there was a flooding condition in a school, and I was asked to help. And I looked at this in the context of rapid urbanization also. How do we deal with the issue of flooding and also deal with how to urbanize a community like that? So very simply, I learned from the environment, really understanding the education and the talents and assets that the community has, looking at the challenges of climate change, then bringing technology of flotation to address so that the buildings are not fixed in a position, and creating a new solution, which is really just a triangular structure which gives you sort of the most stable form of flotation to create this structure that actually starts with a small platform. So we built this platform with the community, and kids immediately jumped on it. We're quite pleased that they were even more comfortable than we imagined. So we multiplied it 16 times to create 100 square meters of real estate, and that was built into the structure that became, the floating school as we know it. This clicker is kind of slow. All right, there you go. I'll just move very quickly. So it's a first structure. It's not perfect, really far from perfect. It leaks, like great architecture does. At the same time, it's been able to accommodate, the life of people there. This is really like a magnet for the community, and has given community a new face, a new landmark, hope, and has attracted a lot of attention. Okay, 1 more minute. It's moves, it kind of floats around a little, and it's kind of it's a community hub. It's had a lot of impact within the community through education, employment, local economy. It's been all over the news, brought international attention to the community. We're doing other things focused on innovation also, a radio station at the waterfront in Port Harcourt, a lakefront kiosk in Chicago, and then, so we basically trying to bring all this together into a regeneration project. And finally, just 3 months ago, the state government finally endorsed the school as a structure that would be incorporated into the master plan of the city. And our imagination is that today we have this structure, and that tomorrow we can begin to imagine it being replicated for various uses through incremental development, schools, hospitals, energy, water, infrastructure, to sort of bring together other initiatives that have sprung up since the development of the school and create a new form of urbanism that is not too far from what we know here today in Venice, which is a water city where we are at, or Amsterdam, where I live, or in Chicago, where I work. And the question is, what if we begin to imagine a new form of architecture and urbanism that, we have the high-rise in the back, we have spaces for recreation, spaces for, housing, spaces for agriculture, and essentially create a new form of architecture and urbanism, a new city that is suitable for the African context, a new African water city. Just what if? Thank you.
I actually don't have a question, but I'll think of a question. How do you maybe navigate the political landscape or the landscape between economic development needs, UN interests, government interests, vis-a-vis this community to whom you're offering this architectural shell with the content yet to be developed in terms of your experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's still a learning process, and like I said, this is just really the, I'd say, seed for a new, a new structure, and it's a very sensitive or delicate structure development model that we're trying to create here. One that is between, let's say, a donor-driven and non-governmental funded, and at the other end, it's also commercial. It has private interests. It has commercial interests. So how do we create a new a development structure that addresses the interests of government, donors, corporate sectors? I think that is the form of a model of development that we have to use to address regeneration of poor communities. You can't simply just clear them out. So it is tricky. We're working on it. We're working with several partners, and we are looking out for greater intelligence out there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.